So my journey's been between small startups and then unicorns, right? You could look at a problem and you could think of a solution, and you could think of a solution that goes beyond, let's say, the first 10 or 100 or 1,000 people. It could be affecting millions and millions of people. And if you do things right, then, like, to the extent the customers also sort of back you up, but, the people deserve to have a respectful way of doing things, a respectful way of transportation, a respectful way of getting medicine, a respectful way of doing everything, to be honest. Then Zaraye sort of was born in 2021. Zaraye, in essence, is basically a platform for manufacturers who wish to buy raw materials. The thesis is pretty simple, which is, 65-70% of all costs in manufacturing are raw material costs. Working with manufacturers for them to sort of find the most efficient and the sort of the cheapest ways of procuring those raw materials so that they can make more money in their businesses, essentially. We've raised a total of $3 million today.
Ahsan,
Yes.
thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We have Ahsan here from Zarai. He's the founder and CEO, B2B marketplace, assisting businesses, and we're going to jump into the details of what amazing work you have been doing in Zarai. But what I love about you, Ahsan, is that the amount of experience you have. You practically grew up in Pakistani startup ecosystem, and I'm very excited to explore that and get into the details. So why don't you bring us through your journey? And when I say journey, from the beginning, that what made Ahsan the person Ahsan is today. So
Yeah.
Please take the floor.
So I've grown up in Pakistan all of my life, between Karachi and Islamabad. So that was slightly sort of different in the sense that I sort of grew up in two different cities. So most of my sort of adolescence was in Islamabad, so saw a very different life there, and then all of a sudden, like, landed in Karachi because this is where my family is from, and it was pure chaos. And that was such a beautiful experience in a sense, because there's like a small city boy of sorts. Like, I'm not going to call Islamabad a small city, but it's sort of fairly peaceful, and it's orderly, and then Karachi is like, it's bustling with activity, and like it's just insane. So I think I had a wonderful time sort of doing my A-levels and then eventually university from here. And so that was a massive learning experience. I think that sort of shaped a lot of things in terms of who I am, because I think I had to learn a lot of things very, very quickly. We're just talking about this, Karachi is not for beginners. So gotta, had to sort of turn that beginner into somebody who had something or knew something. So that was fun. I'm absolutely in love with the city now. Can't imagine myself being anywhere else. And then sort of so I went to business school. I did my undergrad from there. And sort of jumped into, again, it was in all honesty, a pleasant surprise. Back in 2016, and I say back in 2016 as if it was decades ago, but like from a technological standpoint, it was. For reference, I remember back in 2016, actually, we were sort of contemplating whether we should. I was working at Zarai, which is a health tech startup, and we were contemplating whether we should make a mobile app, and the reason was because there isn't enough space in the phones. So, if we sort of put out a mobile app, can we, sort of compete with the rest of the space in the phone? So it was, again, so 2016 in that sense, it seems decades ago from a tech perspective, but that's where I sort of landed. Wasn't really part of a plan, because we're all sort of, trained to, think about the Unilevers and the PMIs, etc. As the places to go, and I end up in a tech startup, and was sort of growing at that time. It was fairly small, and we're sort of in the e-commerce space, mostly things new to me, and it was just amazing. I discovered that so one thing I knew was I'd never want to be. I don't want to be an entrepreneur. I don't want to do my own business, although I'd been sort of, in such activities from a younger age. But I just thought that, like having like a corporate job was much cooler, etc. But then, once I got into this ecosystem, it was just like, it changed everything. I was like, okay, fine. So there's a way of doing things which is, well, not generally the most sort of orthodox way of doing it. And I think that sort of flipped a switch. I've never like for a day worked in a corporate structure, to be honest. Like I've been in startups throughout then.
Wow.
So that's how my journey started, and it was so I think what was really fascinating was that it was always about because startups are generally by nature so small, and they have to be there. They're forced to be so agile because you don't have time to sort of, or any kind of resource for that matter, to sort of not be effective. You're always trying to figure out what's the most valuable sort of use of this resource, right? And so it's never bureaucracy, it's never red tape, and that was something that I think just sort of resonated with the person who I am. And it has its own sort of merits when it comes to, especially with bigger structures, but like that's what I love. And so I worked there. I worked at Careem, which was, again, at that time, was like it was a social revolution, like we were talking about back in the day. And I think that sort of, again, so the switches were sort of, they kept on flipping, but in like a higher intensity every time. And Kareem was that. It was just I think it was one of the best times I've sort of worked in any organization. And we're like sort of changing how people moved, and we were really enabling people there, and that's where we started to learn, number one. So the first lesson at the first job was that there's actually a way of doing things which is fairly unorthodox, right? It's because that's not what you learn in books, right? So what you're taught in the business school is generally a very structured way of getting things done, whereas in startups, we're talking about how it's all pre-product market fit in startups, and books are generally post-product market fit, right? And so that first switch flipped there, and then with Kareem, the impact that you can have, real impact with for people, and then you start seeing things in a very different manner, right? And I think that's like the thing that I learned there, that you could look at a problem and you could think of a solution, and you could think of a solution that goes beyond, let's say, the first 10 or 100 or 1,000 people. It could be affecting millions and millions of people. And if you do things right, then like, to the extent the customers also sort of back you up, right? Kareem had a bunch of hiccups with the local government sort of putting a ban potentially, or some kind of, like, I remember there was well, I don't remember entirely, but it was either some problem with the Sindh government in terms of the Motor Act or something, or it was just sort of a rumor. I don't understand exactly, but like the people came behind the brand, and they were like, no, there's no way Kareem's gonna shut down in any manner. So I think that's one big lesson there, that there is great value to be given to people, and if you do that, one, there is possibility, and then if you do it the right way, it sort of really changes a lot of things in the society. So yeah, I was there. So my journey's been between small startups and then unicorns, right? So did a bunch of that. Worked with Mohafiz. You've recorded a podcast with Fadhai. It was a brilliant experience in terms of really finding the core mission. Because as a younger sort of person, back then I was sort of still in the process of figuring out why I really want to do the right thing, or what the right thing is for me. And then obviously Mohafiz was that journey, in where I basically figured out, okay, so what am I made of, and what am I made for, and it sort of evolves obviously over time, but it sort of gives you the framework to sort of get to that. And I think that was like the next switch that flipped. Then I joined Civil. We were just launching Pakistan. Actually, I joined after Pakistan was launched as a market, but it was like fairly early on, because it just launched in Lahore. So I was in Islamabad back in the day with Muhafiz, and then I came back to Karachi, and again that was like another thing, because if you're it was such a needed thing. It's still such a massively sort of required gap, especially for a city like Karachi. I've used public transport, and I think the question where you ask What am I, what's the thing that makes me who I am. I think I always loved doing these things because I think because of some of my own experiences, to be honest. I've used public transport in Karachi, and I think every time the one thing that sort of crossed my mind was, it's okay if it's like, it's congested and all of those things, but the people deserve to have a respectful way of doing things, a respectful way of transportation, a respectful way of getting medicine, a respectful way of doing everything, to be honest. And I think that's really something that sort of pushes me to do the things that I do. And and Soul was one of those things that where we could actually provide that for people. So did that, and eventually I think it was time for me to sort of embark on my own journey. It was sort of brewing in my head for a while, in terms of I gotta do something from an entrepreneurship angle, because I think despite me trying to convince myself that I didn't want to do it at one point, I think it was always kind of there. So then Zaraye sort of was born in 2021. Zarai, in essence, is basically a platform for manufacturers who wish to buy raw materials. The thesis is pretty simple, which is 65-70% of all costs in manufacturing are raw material costs. There's a gap where there's an efficiency that can be created in the market, which is so obvious, right? Because it's such a massive part of the cost structure. And the more we sort of delved into it, the more we understood that it's just so absolutely necessary. And I think that's essentially, so again, switch flipped. And as I said, 2021 that I was born. We're basically working with manufacturers for them to sort of find the most efficient and the sort of the cheapest ways of procuring those raw materials so that they can make more money in their businesses, essentially. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. We help them procure more efficiently, whether it's from a pricing perspective, from a logistics delivery perspective, from a financing the inventory perspective. These are the three major problems that come in with procurement of raw materials. That's what we do. And Alhamdulillah, it's going well so far, with all its challenges, obviously, because can't shy away from talking about those, especially in 2024 with Pakistan. But God has been very, very kind, Alhamdulillah.
That's
And
phenomenal.
that's basically
You know,
the journey.
couple of things while listening to you, right? First of all, so Zarai has raised over 2 million.
We've raised a total of $3 million to date.
3 million,
Yes.
$3 million to date. And I'm assuming you have done it all at a very young age. How does that feel in comparison to the average, youngster in Karachi or in Pakistan at large, right? How do you feel about that? How does that make you feel?
I think this is not a question that I've actually sort of thought about a lot, to be honest. I think this is probably the first time I'm thinking about it, because it feels good. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to feel what it feels like. I think it feels great. Not because I think because it's meaningful and hopefully potentially very valuable, for the ecosystem, for the people, for the businesses, for our customers. Because if we're able to pull off what we're trying to pull off, I think this could be a very good sort of thing for the Pakistani economy. And like, I'm not claiming that this is the antidote for all our problems, but again, there are no silver bullets, right? They're only lead bullets. And I really, really think that Zarai is one of them. So it makes me feel really, really good about it, to be honest.
That's phenomenal. And when you talk about living in Islamabad and in Karachi, so what was it like at home, in terms of support, in terms of growing up? How was it for you?
I think that has been one of my biggest blessings and privileges, to be honest. I come from a fairly middle class family. So we had a lot of things, but we also did not have a lot of things. And I think that in itself is sort of a privilege, because once you sort of have to, every time you have to work for those things. And one of the things that I've always been taught is, it's okay to desire whatever you desire, but It is only okay to get it when you earn it. And I think that was a massive lesson. It still helps me every day. Again, as I said, it's been a massive blessing and a privilege because not everybody gets to feel this way. But my parents at home, they've always been very, very encouraging. I was actually very lucky to have teachers who were very encouraging of all the crazy things that I would sort of they'd entertain me. They'd entertain
come
my
up
thought,
with,
which
yeah.
is obviously, I mean, as a young kid, most weren't probably the smartest things to sort of do or think about or whatever. But it was never about shutting things down. It was always okay. Let's reason it out, and if it's fair, then go ahead, do it. And I think that's and not just like, again, even I was, again, I'd say, lucky to have such mentors around that sort of always were a very positive sort of a push for me. So yeah, I think that's been a massive privilege.
Okay, and how big is your family?
I have a sister and obviously my parents.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
So it's
awesome. So, one thing which I would like you to shed some light on, you mentioned the words, social revolution with Careem.
yeah.
What was it like? How would you describe it to an audience in a retrospect now? Because, of course, there are a lot more competition, but Careem, when it came to Pakistani market, what changed for people with Careem and how do you see it? How would you explain it?
So I remember when I was not at Careem, I haven't joined Careem yet, is basically the time that I'm talking about, and it sort of explains most of the things to me. And so there's a massive chai culture in Karachi. Again, this. A lot of the team doesn't know. I think they should try it out. But and you'd overhear people talking about it, to be honest. So if there's like 10-15 tables at a chai place, because it's the same age group, right? So they're talking about whatever is upcoming, etc. And you'd always hear somebody talking about Careem at a restaurant. I'm talking about like 2016, 17, 18 types, right? And so either people were Kareeming to that place or Kareeming out of that place. Somebody was talking about if they had some money they wanted to sort of put in their car as an investment. So it was like if you'd go to a family gathering, somebody would be talking about, oh, I'm thinking like I wanna buy a car and put it into sort of this business because it seems like a great business, all of that. So again, some things obviously sort of came from that era of putting in a lot of money growing that business and burning or whatever you want to call it. But everybody was talking about it. And then I think what was really, really, and then again, I'm sure I'm confusing a bunch of things because the pre-Careem era for me and then the post, like actually joining Careem, I think I'm sort of muddling it out. But and then we understood, like, especially for women, how it became, it's changed the dynamic for a lot of women in the country. They're a lot more mobile now. And I would say 2016 wasn't really that time, and then all of a sudden 2017, 18, 19, and then even now 2024, it's changed a lot of things. I get to see something very interesting on the Karachi roads, by the way, and you'd often see a woman driving a motorcycle now, which is, again, I'm not saying that never happened back in the day, but it's now a lot more common. And I think it's just like a step by step thing that happens, right? So it's not a, yeah, because like, I mean, as a society we have deep rooted cultural sort of norms, right? Good or bad, some good, some bad, whatever. But this isn't one of those things. So these things take a bunch of time to change. And I think, and I every time I see this, I am absolutely, like, it just makes me so happy, to be honest, on a personal level. And I think that was potentially one of the catalysts for that. So yeah, that's what it was. I think it still is, to be honest, and it's not going to stop. I think it's changed at least the bigger cities in Pakistan for forever.
And that's a very beautiful perspective for me because when I think about it, how small little things that we just somehow happen to start using
Yeah,
has such a societal impact.
absolutely.
And it's like chain breaker at a point, where, as you mentioned, that we have certain norms, and then all of a sudden, with the help of technology, you are able to just reach to the masses in a very short space of time.
Absolutely.
It's nothing less to a miracle, right? So technology. So you said that you went to business school,
Yeah.
and now you're running a tech company.
Yeah.
How has that been for you?
I think it's I won't change a thing, to be honest. I think it's been a very fulfilling journey. Again, there's a bunch of mistakes I've made. There's a bunch of things that seemed like a really bad thing to do. Once I did them, but in hindsight, it sort of all stacks up, right? Today, I'm happy to say that in my head, it's all stacked up in the right manner. Not the most optimized, again, if you were to sort of go redesign it, but it's still something which has been very fulfilling. And I think what we need to understand, or like how I see it, is I think the core problem is to find a good problem and then find a good solution, right? So that's the first step, right? And the solution, by the way, is an iterative process. Defining the problem is actually the big step that you have to take, and I think that's like the most important first step. And then once you have that, I think the second step is actually finding the right people to sort of build that, right? And once you have this combination of a good problem to solve, which is valuable, in its own essence, and if you have the right people who understand that, one, the solution is an iterative process. Again, there's no silver bullets, only lead bullets, right?
100%.
I think that's where it sort of becomes so over my journey, especially with Zaraye, I got to work with some very amazing people who were from the tech background, understood this entire premise, and once you sort of have that understanding built within the team, I think that's where you sort of take leaps really to sort of solve a problem. And I think that's how it sort of it sounds in isolation like a business student doing a tech startup. Sure, I'm not a technical founder, but I've learned a few things over time. But more importantly, I think the most important lesson was get the right person for the job and get out of the way.
I think that is very clever, because the way you have just simplified it, right? That successfully having raised and managing that kind of money, and we're going to come on to that how do you manage that kind of money in Pakistan's market? Because $3 million is a lot of money if you were to do the direct conversion from dollars to PKR, right? And deploying that and making progress. But I think one of the things, in my personal opinion as well, this agility and adaptability that you talk about, right?
Yeah.
That if you are a business student, doesn't mean that this is where your forte is going to be. You are able, and you should be every day looking to learn new skills and then evolve and model your future self the way you wanna look at, right? So that point that you touched on, and I know you are very you're very humble and very and it's a good way to be, right? It's a good leadership skill, right? So when you just said that, along the line I have learned that surely you went into the depths, knowing you now after have a detailed conversation prior to the episode as well. So it's very important. So what advice would you give to a young university college student right now who actually thinks the way you think, who actually has this volcanic a mindset that they want to do something meaningful, or they want to do something? What advice would you give them if they were to think of going into the startup route? And I'm gonna further break my question down into, I love the way you mentioned finding the problem, problems worth solving, and then find the solution, and then find the team, right people to do that. And that's leadership. That's MBA in its own, right? If you were to just use that as
Absolutely.
as a vertical, right? So again, with our traditional way of thinking of trading, because most of us here in Pakistan especially think trading as business, or even a lot of people don't even understand the difference between the startup and like a business. So what advice would you give? How would you take them through in terms of like saving the time that, looking back, you could have saved as well? I know it's a very long-winded question.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I think, see, when are you ready for a business, right? Especially so first, the general difference between a startup and a normal conventional business, and I think the simplest definition, as I understand it, and it's a tough thing to sort of define, but as I understand it, is, startups generally are in spaces which don't have a lot of prior sort of information about it. So they're uncertain things, right? And by definition of uncertainty, they're also things that generally tend to be innovative in terms of what you're trying to do. Now, it could be something which is absolutely different in terms of, let's say, how crypto came up, right? And it's an entirely new way of transacting. Or it could be, something like Uber or Careem, which is you already have a transportation system. How could you just, sort of make it a lot better, right? But then, for either of those situations, there aren't really playbooks around, right? Because think of it this way: starting a taxi company or a limo company versus starting an Uber or Careem, they're not the same things, right? Although they're both for transportation. So there's a playbook for how to transport people. There is a playbook for how to transport people through a taxi or a limo company, but there is no playbook on how to sort of build a gig. Now there is, obviously, but like back in the day when sort of Uber came about, there was no playbook there. So I think that's the first differentiation that you have to understand. Because if, let's say, if you're doing something which is orthodox in the sense that it's been done a bunch of times, then just sort of go and study them, right? And just do what works as a starting point. So I think that definition needs to be sort of clear. Is it really something which is now so new that I don't have a playbook to follow, right? So I think number one, that's a differentiation that becomes very important, because if there is a playbook, then sort of it's a big problem is solved, at least for the first sort of few steps, right? So I think, and they're both right, from a business perspective, from a money making, or even a problem solving perspective, right? But I think, so the second question is, when are you really ready for a business, right? And I think before we sort of answer that, and again, I sort of put out the nuances a lot, because I really like to think in those terms. But somebody said, Michael Siebel actually said in one of his interviews, and he put it perfectly. And it's like, it's not a one variable problem; it's a multi-variable problem, right? And I think that's something that we really, really need to understand. Sometimes a lot of people, especially at when they're younger, they tend to think that the idea is the most valuable thing. When again, it's not a single variable problem; it's a multi-variable problem, right? So you have to think about a bunch of things, which by logic means that idea in itself is not really the most important thing, right? There's a bunch of execution that goes around, from a financial perspective, from an operational perspective, from a branding and a customer acquisition. All of those things come into play, and the more you appreciate this, it's harder. It's a steep climb, right? But then that's how you make. I mean, if valuable businesses were so easy to make, everybody would be doing that, left, right, and center. So it's a tough job. Got to understand that, right? It takes years and years. And number two, I think also one thing. I'm sorry, it's just like a bunch of thoughts sort of coming out in my head. But also one thing that we like to sort of imagine, especially right out of university, is because we've gone from class 7th exam to, then if you pass that's class grade 8, and so on and so forth. So it's a very sort of a linear step by step process, right? But once you step into the real life, it's not upward to the right. It's absolutely convoluted, right? And sometimes you take some steps back, and sometimes you accelerate so fast you don't understand how it's happening. So all of that happens, right? And so the linearity in life sort of goes away, right?
Powerful.
And I think that's something that because it's here's the thing, when you graduate, how old are you? 22, 23-ish, right? So you spent all of the lived life at 23 years old with a certain sort of what Simon Sinek says is a finite game, right?
Yeah,
so there's rules,
certainty,
and certainty, 100%. And if you do this, 40% is the passing marks, etc., whatever, 60 or whatever that number is, and once you get there, you go on to the next level, right? In real life now we have understood that's not how it is, and I think that's where basically that transition I think is a very tough one, right? And I think I would really like for young students who are now graduating, coming into whether they're doing their own sort of business or whatever, or they're getting into the corporate life. Um, I think they sort of it's good to understand rather than take some years to do it. So I think that's one thing that I'd really say they understand. And again, business always remains a multi-variable problem. The more you appreciate that, the more you'd appreciate the hardships that come your way, the more you'd be, appreciative of yourself solving those sort of problems. Number one, and then obviously the second part is who's your team, right? Because it's a multivariable problem. I'm sure there is nobody in the world who can solve all problems in a business, right? So you always need the right people, or the right tools for that matter. Now that technology is sort of, like
Advanced.
Sam Altman says, there's going to be one person unicorns eventually now. Maybe that's true. He's a smart guy. I'd sort of like to believe him, but then sort of understand that. I think that would save a lot of time.
That's amazing. And you mentioned Fahad Bhai from Hafiz, right? And
Yeah.
he mentioned during the podcast he went through 6 near bankruptcies, and you mentioned that you had experience working with Mahafiz as well. So
Yeah.
we're talking about a unicorn here, and then we are talking about other companies you mentioned with the Y you mentioned. And then working with Fahad Bhai. So were you with Fahad Bhai during one of those times, or was it at the stability? Because now Muhafiz is actually doing great, right?
Yeah.
So
Mashallah.
mashallah, right? So this up and down. So what was your experience like then?
Oh yeah, so I was there. I think going through one of those periods. It was absolutely. I mean, it was a tough spot to be in, to be honest. We went from I think some 50-ish people to I think 13 or 14 people after I joined in, and we're just trying to figure out literally how to pay the rent, how to pay the bills.
Wow.
So we're sort of doing that. So it was tough. It was a lot of and in those situations you tend to sort of disagree a lot. So there was like so we had some obviously, but again he's a wise soul. So he sort of led us in the right direction. And it was also fun, by the way. In a very sort of, I don't want to say ironic, but in a weird manner, because eventually the people who were there, we always knew that despite all of the hardships, we're all here trying to do the right thing. Do the right thing for the customers, do the right thing by the organization, and do the right thing for the people around us. And that's always such a sort of a relaxing thing, right? For me at least, it's always good to know that the people that you're surrounded by are honest, sincere people, and they're honest and sincere with you. So it was fun. And then in hindsight, I think it's one of the more formative experiences for me as an entrepreneur. Because I'd seen I joined Careem and it was already a unicorn. I'd seen and while I was at Mohafiz, there was the Uber $3.1 billion exit. You've seen that, and then you're sort of struggling to pay the bills. It sort of makes you appreciate again how things aren't linear, right? And by definition, when you talk about 6 bankruptcies, so you've gotten out of one and then you've gotten into it again, which just logically says that it's not always linear, right, and towards the up. There's ups and downs, and all of that. So it's a very convoluted path. And so I think it was amazing.
That's wonderful. And so you were there in the trenches, and I think most meaningful relationships are formed during adversity, because this is where the true definition of the true, the veil is off from a person, who is around you. So being in that sort of environment or circumstances, and then working through whatever you guys have done and having that bond that you have today, it's just phenomenal. And it also speaks volume and supports the true spirit of an entrepreneurship, that entrepreneurs are sort of very mindful and understanding of these situations. So, of course, you're not with Mohafiz and you went ahead and you started Zaraye, right?
Yeah.
So, having all of those experiences and then going on your different path, because oftentimes what happens is that some people, not all, but some people throughout their journey, if they have supported someone, they expect them to just forever be there or not allow them to just like go in that path. And I find that in many people, actually, surprisingly, right, because they would want to hold good talent back, right? But I think the true thank or the gratitude is to pass it on in shape of let the individual flourish, right? And that's what you have done. So managing 3 million and having done that, talk to me about how is that going and how has that been, and how big is the team now, and what are the plans in future?
Yeah, so we started off, we were trying to fundraise. I think I reached out to about 400 people, I guess, at one point.
Wow.
And those are the normal numbers, right? So it's not as if we were in a unique position. But that was the time when everybody was like raising left, right, and center. So you sort of tend to think and overthink and all of those things. I think we just had to sort of be a lot more patient for the right time and the right sort of partner to come on board. And then we got super lucky. And I think our sort of all the hard work paid off. Tiger came in, which was a big thing for us at a pre-seed level. Faisal from Zen, he's always been a massive support. Literally from like the day one, he's been around. So he was a massive support. So we sort of locked that round, and we were ready to go. And it was exciting. This is Jan of 22. And then we realized that there's a bunch of regulatory sort of hoops that you have to jump through, and then we basically just sort of waited, and it's just going through all of those processes. That was, I think, one of the more frustrating times, because you've raised in principle, but you don't have the money to sort of build your business now. So I think that happened with us for the next 3-4ish months, till we sort of waited for the money to come in. That happened, and I think we sort of, obviously we were doing the things that we were supposed to do with whatever a small amount of money we had in the bank, building all of that, and then it sort of took off, and it's been exciting. What happened was, the second half of 2022, we all know, the macro started to sort of crash. Pakistan started to sort of also economically get into some kind of trouble. And by the time 2023 hit, we were deep into trouble from an economic standpoint. And I think that was, again, so you've seen the unicorns. You've seen how you basically use those funds to sort of scale up really, really fast and all those things, and then you eventually go on to raise your own pre-seed. Which again, I mean, 3 is not the same as the hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's still a good start, right?
Absolutely.
But then this happens, so you gotta like really push the brakes hard, because you don't know how long it's going to last. It's still going on. And so that happens. That was again a different experience in itself. I think, like, I mean, I'm a bad sort of I'm a bad narrator when it comes to talking about something which is in the past, because I think I like the feelings then, and then eventually with the hindsight, all of that, I sort of tend to muddle those up. But again, in all honesty, I think it was also a good time in a sense, where and I'm happy that we got to we got the delay, for that matter, because if we'd sort of scaled up our expenses even earlier, we could have been in trouble. So again, in hindsight, that was such a blessing again, right?
Blessing in disguise.
Blessing in disguise. And I always keep on saying that there's certain plans that you can keep on making, but then there's certain divine plans that you don't know about. And I think it was one of those divine interventions, to be honest. And I was like really riled up all the time, just like why isn't the bank responding? Why aren't these documents going through and all of those things? And now I look back, I'm like, man, you could have taken like another couple of weeks, so I mean, so that happened. So all of that has been, I think it's been a massive challenge, for sure. But again, that's what it's been. It's a challenge. It's part of the game, right? This is not the first time it's happening. I'm sure it's not the last time it's happening. But when you're out to make a business that's going to last 100 years, these are just cycles, right? So you got to prepare for the good times. You also got to prepare for the bad times. I'd rather prepare for the bad times before I prepare for the good times, to be honest, because it's easy. Like, I mean, on a relative scale, it's easier in the good times. It's not as easy in the bad times. And they both have their own challenges, right? In the good times, you've got to be really fast, super innovative, in terms of sort of getting ahead. I think here you got to be innovative in terms of surviving a lot of things with much smaller sort of set of resources. So anyways, in a nutshell, I think it's been a great journey so far. We're still around, we're still going strong, still I think more optimistic than ever, to be honest. I think we're going to it's few droplets in the big ocean that we're trying to sort of make ripples in. But I'm way more positive today, to be honest, that it's going to happen. So let's see. Fingers crossed.
Talk to us about a bit more about preparing more for the hard times than the good times.
Man, here's the simple thing. Number one, bad times generally means what? You're going to make less money, right? Which means that you're going to spend less money, right? And I mean, spending more is always great than spending less, right? It's easier. So I think that's one of the tougher ones. I think one of the toughest things that we've seen, and I think it's just been a countrywide thing, unfortunately, is when the tough times are so consistent and persistent in their badness, let's call it that, it becomes tougher psychologically for everyone, right? To keep on, so I mean, how long can you stay optimistic, right? And then there's multiple personality types, right? So as an entrepreneur, it's one of your curses to be like, unrealistically optimistic sometimes, or at least stay that way in your head. But then you're not the only one who's going to make it. So there's so many people, right? Even your customers, they become, especially in B2B, they're also trying to rationalize. So now you have a smaller market to sort of tap into. So it's all that's the big challenge. How do you keep everybody motivated? How do you still keep on seeing the light at the end of the tunnel of sorts? I'm making it sound as if there's like a big depressing movie that's going on, but in all honesty, it sometimes it feels that way, especially when it's such a collective thing that's going on for a while. We're seemingly recovering. It's not as bad, or I think the alternate theory is that we sort of gotten stronger, and we're like, okay, fine, this is going to happen. What are we going to do next, anyways? So I think that's what I mean. The crazy part is that, again, we all know it's not the first time, it's not the last, right? So you got to prepare. You got to prepare in terms of how you're going to stay afloat financially. You got to prepare in terms of how well your product offering is designed to keep on getting your customers back to you. That's a massive preparation. You have to prepare how you're going to operate with a lot less. You have to prepare, again, as I said, psychologically is probably one of the most important ones. How do you sort of see through the storm? So yeah, that's what I meant.
No, that's amazing. And what is your take on Pakistan's startup ecosystem? And you mentioned Faisal Aftab, I believe, right? Who is the shark on the Pakistani Shark Tank,
Yeah.
I believe, right?
I'm so excited about that.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think about Shark Tank, obviously, and then Pakistani startup ecosystem in the coming years? What are your predictions? What are your prophecies around that?
I'm not big on making a lot of predictions, to be honest, but I think there's certain things that are inevitable, right? And progress is inevitable. We were talking about how it's humanity's curse to keep on going forward. I think those things are going to happen, right? We are a meaningful, at least ratio of population in the world. And even otherwise, I think we're a meaningful player in a lot of senses. Where if we're a nuclear power, so I mean you can't ignore Pakistan, right? And which just means that there's certain things that are going to happen and Pakistan is going to go forward. Is what I feel, and is what my take is. I think there is an inflection point coming around the corner. Hopefully, that's my hope, because the opportunity is massive. That's what everybody keeps on talking about, right? I think that what we need are structural changes, right? And I think we'll talk about this in a bit. But I think Pakistan is great. It's an amazing place for small businesses. It incentivizes for businesses to be small, right? And it really disincentivizes business to be large. And that's the structural changes I'm talking about, right? So once those start happening, that's where you'd see like a lot of players actually start sort of picking up insanely fast, is what I think. Um, and I think that's the inflection point. We felt that inflection point coming in 2020, 2021. But I think this is like, COVID economics sort of having their effects for the longer term. And then obviously the global macros are a thing, and then the internal situation is a thing, and all of those things. But that inflection point has to come. And with the ecosystem, I think, see, here's the thing. There's certain amazing players in the ecosystem, right? Who are doing a phenomenal job. And that's what any ecosystem is like. There is a certain probability, it's statistics, right? So, certain, startups, and a very small percentage of them generally tend to make it really big. And then a lot of those don't, right? And I think we're just going through our own cycle. We just started off a little later than everybody, not a little, actually a lot later than everybody else. And I think we're just going through that cycle, right? It's just one big success story away, right? And you have one, and then you have another two, and then you have five, and then you have eight, and all of a sudden you'll be like, yeah, now this is there, right? So inertia is the highest at the start. It's that's the trouble. I think we just got to push through. Again, we've talked about this. I'm somebody who likes to bet on people, right? And I like to bet that people can do amazing things. So that's the view that I like to keep. Again, it's easier to be slightly more pessimistic, but I'm very optimistic. And I think Shark Tank's going to. I'm excited because I feel there's a bunch of really brilliant ideas, right? And what we don't have, unfortunately, is we don't have enough incubation of how these ideas need to sort of come to life, right? There's a very, if you look at generally, the founder sort of makeup of our ecosystem, a lot of those are ex, Rocket, Careem, etc., right? Including myself, I'm an ex Careemer, for example. Because those are like training grounds, right? I'm not saying that's the only place. There's other amazing founders who weren't in those organizations, but then again, like, how many do we have really, right? And I think, and that sort of halted with the 22, 23 scenario. But once you have those 4, 5, 8, 10, I think that's just going to set off a chain reaction, because I think that's what it is. It's a chain reaction. Once as a society we understand and we get sort of the taste of, it's like tasting blood, right? That innovation sort of starts to happen.
Yes.
I don't think we'd be able to stop.
Maybe a change.
And then everybody's going to come in. And Shark Tank, I think, is one of those platforms for, again, I'm sort of talking, we're sort of advertising Shark Tank a lot, but that's what I feel, because it really, like what we've seen, for example, with Shark Tank India or you know, Australia or the UK, etc., is that, you know, you don't have to be like from a fancy university, some graduate, you know, from a consultancy firm or whatever. You just have to be an entrepreneur, and you have a shot. And if you have the right things, the right investors are going to back you up, right? And it's not necessarily the VC model, you know, that comes into play, but
100%.
it's you know, it sort of triggers the. So I'm excited.
That's amazing.
I'm excited to see.
That's amazing. And Ahsan, thank you so much for being very candid and sharing your journey with us. And, you know, we are looking forward to following your journey with Zaraye and all the amazing things that you're going to do. Not
Thanks,
a shadow of a doubt. Before we close off this episode, in retrospect, what would you have done differently if you had the opportunity? What would you do differently if you were to get a chance?
With anything? With Zarai?
With anything in your journey, anything that comes to mind.
It's an interesting question. I'm not really. Sorry, I might take
No,
too much
it's
time.
okay.
We'll probably have to edit out the long pause. But I think I would have. I don't know, for the. So how I like to sort of look at what I want my life to be is basically like a bunch of very unique
Because
experiences.
we're talking about power of one man,
Yeah.
right? And Ahsan is a force, right? And he has
You're
worked.
very generous. you're
No,
very,
but this is how it is, right? You've worked hard for it. You have substance to show for it.
Yeah.
It's not like a cotton candy, right? That when you so there is a lot that goes into becoming that force, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that people don't generally see.
Yeah.
But it comes with a lot of regrets, a lot of trade-offs, a lot of mistakes that if you could or had the opportunity to go back, you would have done it better. Is that sort of an essence of that question?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think I'm in many aspects, I'm in a work in progress anyways, but I think I would want to be able to champion people a lot better than I am able to today, I think. And I'd like to start learning that a lot younger than, you know. So I got that sense much later on in life. You know, the power of the collective. So there you're talking about the power of one man. I think it just becomes a lot more potent if you have the right people around you, right? Everybody sort of the sum becomes much larger, right? And I think I'd sort of understand that a lot younger, maybe. I think that's one thing that I'd want to change. Yeah.
A true humanist at heart.
I hope so. I try to be.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you for having me. It was
Thank
lovely.
you. Thank you.